Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Making of a Warrior. Staff Sergeant Cole Mitchell learned early that loyalty was earned through blood and tested through fire. Growing up in the Rust Belt of Ohio, he watched his father work 3 jobs to keep their family afloat while his mother battled cancer. When she died during his senior year, Cole enlisted the day after graduation, carrying his father's final words. "Trust is a luxury, son. Never give it cheap." 8 years of military service had forged Cole into something harder than steel. 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star, and a reputation for getting his men home alive had earned him respect throughout the 82nd Airborne. But it was during a brief leave in Charleston that he met Brenna Walsh at a beach sidebar, her auburn hair catching the sunset like fire. Brenna came from old Southern money, the kind that whispered about lineage over mint juleps. Her father owned half the commercial real estate in Charleston, and she'd grown up believing the world owed her comfort. She was drawn to Cole's intensity, the way other men stepped aside when he entered a room. To her, he was an exotic rebellion against her predictable world of country club galas and debutante balls. Their courtship was a clash of worlds. Cole's idea of romance was teaching her to shoot at the range. Brenna's was weekend trips to Kiowa Island resorts. But something magnetic held them together, her beauty and his unwavering strength. When Cole proposed after a whirlwind 8-month romance, Brenna saw it as her chance to play the devoted military wife, a role that seemed romantic in theory. The twins, Emma and Luke, arrived 2 years later. Cole threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He built them a treehouse with his own hands, taught them to ride bikes in the base housing parking lot, and read them bedtime stories about brave knights and distant kingdoms. For 6 years, the Mitchell family looked picture perfect, the decorated soldier, his beautiful wife, and their adorable children. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Brenna grew restless with the military lifestyle, tired of moving every few years, exhausted by the long deployments. She missed her daddy's money, the social status she'd sacrificed, and the attention she once commanded. Cole, focused on his career and providing for his family, missed the signs that his wife was drowning in a life she'd never truly wanted. As Cole prepared for his latest deployment to Jordan, a routine peacekeeping mission that should have been his easiest yet, Brenna was already making plans of her own. She'd been cultivating a friendship with Troy Daniels, a smooth-talking real estate developer who'd moved to their North Carolina-based town. Troy had charm, money, and most importantly, he was there while Cole was gone. The night before Cole's deployment, as he tucked the twins into bed, 8-year-old Emma looked up at him with eyes that mirrored his own. "Promise you'll come back, Daddy." "Always, sweetheart. Daddy always comes home." It was a promise he'd keep, though not in the way any of them expected. Chapter 2. The Video That Changed Everything. 3 months into deployment, Cole's daily routine was military precision. Morning briefings at 0600, convoy security missions through the Jordanian desert, evening reports, and a satellite call home every Tuesday and Friday. Jordan was supposed to be a cakewalk compared to Afghanistan, training local forces, maintaining peace, keeping the supply line secure. For a soldier of Cole's experience, it was almost boring. The video arrived on a Thursday. Cole was in the communications tent, having just finished a routine call with his commanding officer about supply requisitions, when his personal phone buzzed. A message from Brenna, unusual since their scheduled calls were still 2 days away. He expected maybe a quick update about the kids or a photo from Luke's baseball game. Instead, he found a 2-minute video that would reshape the landscape of his life. The footage was shot in their living room, the same room where he'd played countless games of Monopoly with the twins, where they'd opened Christmas presents just 4 months ago. But now Troy Daniels occupied Cole's leather recliner, wearing Cole's favorite team jersey, while the twins crawled over him like they'd known him forever. "Say hi to Daddy." Brenna's voice came from behind the camera, sugary sweet and poisonous. "Hi, Daddy," the twins chorused, but they were looking at Troy, not the camera. The scene shifted. Brenna appeared on screen, radiant in a way Cole hadn't seen in years. "Kids love their new daddy," she said, her voice carrying that particular cruelty that only comes from someone who knows exactly where to drive the knife. "We're selling the house and moving to Florida with him. I'm filing for divorce. Don't come looking for us." The video ended with Troy's arm around Brenna's waist, the twins playing at their feet, and family photos of Cole clearly visible being packed into boxes in the background. Cole watched it 3 times before the rage hit. The communications tent suddenly felt like a cage. Cole's hands trembled, not with fear, but with a fury so pure it threatened to incinerate everything in its path. 8 years of marriage, 2 children, 3 deployments where he'd missed birthdays and holidays to serve his country, and this was his reward. He typed 2 words, "Take care." Then he forwarded everything to his lawyer. Master Sergeant Luis Vasquez found him an hour later, sitting in the dark outside his quarters, staring at the desert stars. Luis had served with Cole in Afghanistan, had seen him carry wounded soldiers through Taliban fire without flinching. "Whatever it is, brother, we'll handle it," Luis said, settling beside him. Cole showed him the video. Luis watched in silence, his jaw tightening with each second. When it ended, he looked at Cole with something approaching fear. In 8 years of friendship, Luis had never seen that particular expression on Cole's face. "What do you need?" Luis asked simply. "Information," Cole replied. "And patience. When we get home, I'm going to destroy them both." Over the next 2 months, Cole became a different kind of soldier. By day, he executed his duties with mechanical precision. By night, he planned. He researched Troy Daniels, memorized Brenna's patterns, and began building a network of contacts he'd need when he returned. His lawyer, Robert Kim, was a former JAG officer who understood military divorces. Within weeks, he'd frozen the joint accounts, filed emergency custody motions, and began documenting Brenna's abandonment. But Cole wanted more than legal victory. He wanted complete annihilation. The rest of his unit noticed the change. Cole had always been intense, but now he radiated something darker. He'd become a predator, calculating the perfect moment to strike. His men followed his orders without question, but they also gave him space, sensing that their sergeant was planning something far beyond their mission parameters. 2 weeks before their scheduled return, Cole received another message from Brenna. She was panicking. The lawyer had frozen everything. The house sale had fallen through. Troy was backing away from their Florida plans. She was alone with 2 confused children, facing a legal battle she was utterly unprepared for. "We need to talk when you get home," she wrote. "The kids miss you. Maybe we can work something out." Cole didn't reply. He was already 3 moves ahead, and she was still playing checkers while he'd moved to chess. Chapter 3. Homecoming. Fort Bragg in October was painted in autumn fire, red maples and golden oaks creating a postcard backdrop for what should have been a joyful reunion. Cole's unit returned to the usual fanfare. Families crying with relief, children running into their father's arms, spouses embracing after months of separation. Cole stepped off the transport bus to find only Luis's wife Maria waiting for him. "She called me," Maria explained, her voice thick with embarrassment. "Said she couldn't face the crowd. She's at the house with the kids." Cole nodded, shouldering his duffel bag. He'd expected this. Brenna had always been a coward when confronted with the consequences of her actions. The 20-minute drive to their neighborhood felt like a tactical approach. Cole studied familiar landmarks with new eyes, cataloging sight lines, escape routes, and defensive positions. Old habits from Afghanistan, but useful for what was coming. Their house, the house he'd bought with his combat pay and signing bonuses, looked smaller than he remembered. Brenna's car was in the driveway, next to an unfamiliar BMW that Cole immediately recognized from his research as belonging to Troy Daniels. Bold. Stupid, but bold. Cole entered through the front door, his key still working despite everything. The house felt different, furniture rearranged, family photos removed, his presence systematically erased. He could hear voices from the kitchen, Brenna's nervous laughter mixing with a deeper male voice. He set his duffel bag down silently and moved toward the sound. They were sitting at the kitchen table, going through what appeared to be legal documents. Troy looked exactly like his photos. Tall, soft around the middle, with the kind of fake confidence that comes from inherited money and never being punched in the face. Brenna had lost weight, her cheekbones sharp with stress, but she was still beautiful in that fragile way that had first attracted him. Neither had heard him enter. "The lawyer says we need to be careful about the custody arrangement," Troy was saying. "Military courts favor fathers, especially decorated ones. We might need to consider supervised visitation only." "He won't fight for them," Brenna replied, her voice carrying a certainty that made Cole's blood freeze. "Cole's career is everything to him. He won't want the hassle of single parenting. We just need to make it expensive enough that he'll give up. And if he doesn't—" Brenna's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Then we disappear. Dad has connections in the Caymans. Cole's just a soldier. What's he gonna do? Invade a foreign country?" Cole stepped into the doorway. "Hello, Brenna." The effect was electric. Brenna's face went white, her hand instinctively moving to her throat. Troy lurched to his feet, knocking over his chair, looking like a man who'd just realized he was standing in a tiger's cage. "Cole," Brenna stammered. "You're early. The kids are at my sister's. You thought I'd call first?" Cole moved into the room with predatory grace, noting the exits, the knife block, Troy's position relative to the sliding door. Like a polite ex-husband. Troy found his voice, puffing up with false bravado. "Look, Mitchell, this doesn't have to be difficult. We're all adults here. Brenna and we're in love. These things happen." Cole turned his attention to Troy with the same focus he'd once used to identify IED placement from 200 yards. "You're in my house, sitting at my table, discussing my children's future. Tell me, Troy, how exactly did you imagine this conversation would go?" Something in Cole's voice made Troy step backward. Brenna caught the movement, her fear ratcheting higher. "Cole, please," she said, standing slowly. "We need to think about the children. They're confused enough already." "The children?" Cole's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "The ones calling him daddy in your little video. The ones you promised to take away from me while I was serving our country. Those children." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Brenna said, tears starting. "I was lonely, and Troy was there, and I thought." "You thought?" Cole moved closer, his presence filling the room like a storm front. "You thought I was expendable. You thought my service meant nothing. You thought I'd roll over and let you steal my life." Troy cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "The thing is, Mitchell, Brenna's happiness matters too. She deserves." The words died in his throat as Cole's attention fixed on him completely. In Afghanistan, Cole had perfected a stare that could make Taliban fighters reconsider their life choices. Troy was soft civilian stock. He folded in seconds. "Where are my children?" Cole asked quietly. "At my sister Rachel's," Brenna whispered. "In Wilmington. They're safe, Cole. I'd never—" "You'd never what? Abandon them? Use them as weapons? Teach them to call another man daddy while their real father is overseas?" Brenna was crying openly now, her mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I know it looks bad, but I can explain." "No," Cole said simply. "You can't." He walked to the refrigerator, noting the absence of his favorite beer, the presence of Troy's organic juice blends. On the front, held by magnets, were drawings the twins had made. Stick figures of a family, but the daddy figure had been crossed out and replaced with a new one labeled Troy. Cole removed one of the drawings, studying it with clinical detachment. "Tell me, Troy, what do you do for work?" The sudden change in topic threw Troy off balance. Real estate development. Commercial properties mainly. Successful. Very. I've got projects all over the Carolinas." Cole nodded thoughtfully. "And Brenna, how's your father's health these days?" Brenna's confusion was visible. He's fine." "What?" "Just catching up." Cole refolded the drawing and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll be collecting my children tomorrow. You have until then to decide how difficult you want to make this." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Troy, you might want to check on that commercial development in Myrtle Beach. I hear there are some foundation issues developing." Troy's face went pale. "How do you—" But Cole was already gone, leaving them to wonder what he knew and what he was planning. He had 48 hours before his next move, and 8 years of tactical training to put to use. The war had come home, and Staff Sergeant Cole Mitchell was done playing defense. Chapter 4. Gathering Assets. Cole checked into a motel 6 miles from base, a nondescript place where he could think without the ghosts of his former life haunting every corner. The room was Spartan, exactly what he needed. He'd learned in the military that clear spaces led to clear thinking, and he needed crystal clarity for what was coming. His first call was to Master Sergeant Luis Vasquez. "How'd it go?" Luis asked without preamble. "About as expected. They're scared but not broken. Yet, what do you need?" Cole had served with Luis in Afghanistan, where they developed an almost telepathic understanding. Luis was more than a friend. He was family, the kind forged in combat and tested under fire. More importantly, Luis had connections throughout the military community and a particular talent for acquiring information that wasn't meant to be public. Everything you can find on Troy Daniels. Business records, financial history, personal connections. I also need a list of every military family in a 50-mile radius that's been hurt by home foreclosures or predatory real estate deals in the last 3 years. That's specific. I have a theory. Guys like Troy don't just happen to be in military towns. They hunt here for a reason. Luis was quiet for a moment. "You want me to ask Cortez about this?" He's been working civilian security since he got out. Knows all the local players. Staff Sergeant Miguel Cortez had served 2 tours with him before transitioning to civilian life. Unlike many veterans who struggled with the change, Cortez had thrived, starting a security consulting firm that catered to high-end clients throughout the Carolinas. He had a gift for reading people and an even better gift for finding their secrets. Set up a meeting. Tonight, if possible. While Luis made his calls, Cole opened his laptop and began his own research. Military intelligence training wasn't just for foreign enemies. The same principles applied to domestic targets. He started with public records, building a comprehensive profile of Troy Daniels. What he found was illuminating. Troy's business, Coastal Development Solutions, specialized in distressed property acquisition, a fancy term for buying homes from desperate families at below-market prices. His client list read like a roster of military wives whose husbands were deployed, divorced families struggling with legal fees, and veterans dealing with PTSD and financial difficulties. But it was the pattern that made Cole's blood run cold. Troy had a type. Military spouses, usually attractive, usually vulnerable, usually with assets worth acquiring. Brenna wasn't his first conquest. She was his latest mark in a systematic campaign. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Luis. "Cortez can meet at 2100. Bonefish Bar on Rayford Road. Come hungry." The Bonefish Bar was the kind of place that catered to off-duty soldiers and veterans. Dim lighting, strong drinks, and booths where conversation stayed private. Cole arrived first, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances. Old habits. Cortez arrived precisely at 2100, followed by Luis. Miguel had put on weight since leaving the Army, but his eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning the room. He slid into the booth and got straight to business. "Luis told me you need information on Troy Daniels. I can tell you right now, that man's a parasite." "Explain." Cortez ordered a beer before continuing. 3 months ago, I got hired by a client, woman named Jennifer Santos, husband deployed to Kuwait. She comes home one day to find foreclosure notices, discovers her husband's been missing mortgage payments because someone convinced her to refinance through a shell company. Guess who's connected to that shell company? Troy. Bingo. But here's the interesting part. Jennifer Santos is drop-dead gorgeous, just like your wife. And Troy made a very personal effort to help her through her financial difficulties. Cole felt pieces clicking into place. How many others? That I know of? At least 6 in the last 2 years. All military wives, all attractive, all financially vulnerable. Troy's method is simple. He identifies targets, creates or exploits financial pressure, then moves in as the white knight savior. Sometimes it's romance, sometimes it's just business, but he always gets what he wants. Luis leaned forward. "There's more. I talked to some guys in the 505th. Troy's been spotted at spouse support group meetings, deployment send-offs, any place where lonely military wives might be found. He's hunting. And the authorities? Cortez shook his head. Everything he does is technically legal. Aggressive, predatory, but legal. The man's smart. He always covers his tracks, always has plausible deniability. Cole absorbed this information, his mind already calculating angles of attack. What about his business? Weaknesses? Plenty. His success depends on maintaining relationships with local banks, city planning boards, and real estate agents. He's also leveraged to the hilt. Most of his properties are mortgaged through a web of shell companies. Cash flow problems could collapse his entire operation. And personally, Cortez smiled grimly. Troy Daniels is a coward who's never been in a real fight in his life. He surrounds himself with lawyers and accountants, but underneath all that money and bluster, he's soft. The kind of man who folds the moment someone pushes back harder than he's prepared for. They talked for another hour, Cortez providing details about Troy's associates, his typical operating procedures, and his known weaknesses. By the time they parted ways, Cole had the beginnings of a plan that would use Troy's own methods against him. But first, he needed his children. The drive to Wilmington took 2 hours, giving Cole time to think. Brenna's sister Rachel lived in a modest suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where military families often retired, close enough to the coast for fishing, far enough from base to feel civilian. Cole didn't approach the house directly. Instead, he parked 3 blocks away and waited. At 0730, right on schedule, the twins emerged for the school bus, wearing clothes he didn't recognize. They looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, and something twisted in his chest watching them. At 0830, Rachel left for work. At 0900, the house was empty. Cole walked up to the front door and knocked. When no one answered, he used skills learned in urban warfare training to gain entry through a back window. He wasn't there to steal or damage. He was there to learn. The twins' temporary room broke his heart. His children were sleeping on air mattresses, their toys crammed into garbage bags, their lives reduced to whatever could be carried quickly. On the small desk, Emma had been writing in a diary with a pink pen. "I miss Daddy." One entry read, "Mommy says he doesn't want us anymore because we like Troy. But I don't like Troy. He smells funny and his hugs feel wrong. When is Daddy coming home?" Cole photographed the page, then several others, documenting his children's confusion and pain in Brenna's own daughter's handwriting. This wasn't just custody evidence, it was ammunition. He left the house exactly as he'd found it and drove back to North Carolina, his jaw tight with fury. Brenna had not only stolen his children, she'd convinced them he didn't want them. That particular cruelty demanded a response that went beyond legal remedies. His phone rang as he crossed the county line. Brenna's number. "Hello. Cole, we need to talk. The kids are asking questions I can't answer. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "Visitation. Weekends, maybe." Troy's willing to be flexible. The casual way she mentioned Troy's flexibility regarding his own children sent ice through Cole's veins. How generous of him. Don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. Are you? Because I just spent the morning reading Emma's diary. She thinks I abandoned her. She thinks you told her I don't want her anymore. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "You weren't supposed to. How did you? Bring my children home, Brenna. Today. I can't do that. My lawyer says." "Your lawyer is about to have bigger problems than custody arrangements. Bring them home, or I'll come get them myself." He hung up and immediately called his own attorney. Robert Kim was former military, a man who understood both the law and the unique challenges faced by service members. More importantly, he was prepared for war. "How did it go?" Kim asked. "She's using the children as weapons, trying to turn them against me. I have documentation." "Good. I've been busy too. Troy Daniels has some interesting business partnerships. Shell companies, questionable financing, several deals that skirt the edge of fraud. Nothing prosecutable yet, but enough to make him nervous. Keep digging. I want everything: business associates, financial records, personal habits. If he's done this to other military families, I want names and evidence." That might take some time. Cole stared out at the highway, thinking about Emma's diary, about his children sleeping on air mattresses, about Brenna's casual cruelty. Times one thing I've got plenty of. Troy Daniels is about to learn the difference between fighting civilians and fighting soldiers. The pieces were in place. Now came the hard part: execution. Chapter 5, Building the Trap. Cole's motel room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. The walls were covered with photographs, timelines, and maps. To an outside observer, it might have looked like the obsession of a madman. To anyone with military intelligence training, it was a textbook operation planning center. 3 days had passed since his ultimatum to Brenna. She hadn't brought the children home, but she also hadn't fled, a sign that Troy was influencing her decisions. Good. Predictable enemies made better targets. Luis arrived at 0600 with coffee and intelligence updates. Cortez came through. Troy's got a meeting today with Pinnacle Bank about refinancing his Myrtle Beach project. Same bank that holds mortgages on half the military housing in the area. Timing, 1000 hours. Downtown branch. Cole studied the bank's location on his map. Perfect. What about the other thing? Luis grinned. Jennifer Santos is very interested in talking. Turns out she's been documenting Troy's activities since her foreclosure. She's got recordings, emails, financial documents, everything. Willing to go public. More than willing. She wants blood. Cole made a note on his timeline. And Sergeant Williams? He's in. Lost his house to one of Troy's shell companies 6 months ago while he was in Iraq. Wife couldn't handle the stress, filed for divorce, took the kids to Oregon. He's got nothing left to lose. Staff Sergeant Derek Williams was a demolitions expert whose family had been destroyed by Troy's business practices. He was also the kind of soldier who understood that some battles couldn't be fought with regulations and proper channels. Cole needed men like Williams for what was coming. At 0930, Cole was positioned outside Pinnacle Bank, watching Troy arrive in his BMW. The man looked confident, well-rested, probably thinking he'd weathered the worst of Cole's anger. He was about to learn otherwise. Cole waited until Troy was inside before making his call. Pinnacle Bank, this is Janet. Janet, this is Staff Sergeant Cole Mitchell. I need to speak with your security department about a potential fraud investigation involving one of your customers. Oh my, let me transfer you to Mr. Henderson. Tom Henderson, the bank's security chief, was a former MP who'd served 2 tours in Iraq. He knew Cole's reputation and was willing to listen when a decorated soldier called with concerns about criminal activity. What kind of fraud are we talking about, Sergeant? Predatory lending schemes targeting military families. I have documentation showing a pattern of exploitation using shell companies and falsified financial information. The perpetrator is in your building right now. Cole spent 10 minutes outlining Troy's activities, mentioning specific cases that Henderson could verify. By the time he finished, the security chief was taking detailed notes. I can't stop his meeting, Henderson said, but I can flag his accounts for review. If what you're telling me is accurate, we've got liability issues. I'll have complete documentation to you by close of business today. But Tom, you might want to check his collateral claims very carefully. I suspect you'll find some interesting discrepancies. Cole hung up and waited. 30 minutes later, Troy emerged from the bank looking considerably less confident. His phone was already ringing, probably frantic calls from business partners wondering why their financial records were suddenly being scrutinized. Phase 1 complete. That afternoon, Cole met Jennifer Santos at a coffee shop near the base. She was exactly as Cortez had described, attractive, intelligent, and furious. She brought a briefcase full of documentation that painted a devastating picture of Troy's methods. He targeted me specifically, she explained, sliding a folder across the table. Showed up at a spouse support meeting, introduced himself as someone who helped military families in financial distress. Within a week, he convinced me that my husband's deployment pay wasn't enough to cover our mortgage. Cole reviewed the documents. Troy had systematically undermined Jennifer's confidence in her family's finances, created artificial urgency about refinancing, then directed her to a shell company that charged predatory rates. When she couldn't make the new payments, Troy's associates had foreclosed, buying the house at auction for 30 cents on the dollar. How many others know about this? I've been in contact with 8 other families. All the same pattern: military wives targeted during deployments, financial pressure applied, assets stripped away. Troy's been running this scam for years. Will they testify? Jennifer's smile was sharp as a blade. They're ready for war. That evening, Cole assembled his team at an abandoned warehouse outside Fayetteville. Luis and Cortez had recruited carefully. 5 men, all veterans, all with personal reasons to hate Troy Daniels. Derek Williams brought demolitions expertise. Tony Reeves brought surveillance equipment. Marcus Chun brought computer skills that bordered on black magic. "Gentlemen," Cole began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd led soldiers through combat. "What we're planning isn't strictly legal. Anyone uncomfortable with that can leave now, no questions asked." No one moved. Cole activated a projector, displaying Troy's photograph. Troy Daniels has built his fortune by exploiting military families. He identifies targets, creates financial pressure, then moves in to steal their assets. He's done this to dozens of families, including some of ours. He clicked to the next slide, a timeline of Troy's activities. His operation depends on secrecy, intimidation, and the assumption that military families won't fight back. He's about to learn that assumption was a mistake. The next slide showed a detailed map of Troy's business locations, residential address, and regular haunts. Our objective is simple: complete destruction of his operation and personal life. We're going to use his own methods against him, but we're going to be more thorough than he ever was. Williams raised his hand. Rules of engagement. Cole's expression hardened. No permanent physical harm unless he escalates first. Everything else is fair game. Financial ruin, professional destruction, personal humiliation, all authorized. Questions? Chin spoke up. What about your custody situation? Phase 1 of the operation. Once Troy's empire starts crumbling, Brenna will realize she backed the wrong horse. The children come home, then we finish what we started. For the next 2 hours, they refine their plan. Chun would hack Troy's business computers, gathering evidence of fraudulent activities. Reeves would conduct surveillance, documenting Troy's daily routines and personal relationships. Williams would handle the more aggressive aspects of financial pressure. Nothing illegal, but certainly intimidating. As the meeting broke up, Luis pulled Cole aside. "You sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." Cole thought about Emma's diary, about his children sleeping on air mattresses, about Brenna's casual cruelty. Troy Daniels declared war on military families. He just never expected us to fight back. And if Brenna doesn't cooperate once Troy's out of the picture? Cole's smile was colder than Afghan winters. "Then she'll learn that I treat all my enemies the same way, regardless of our history." The next morning, Cole received a call from Robert Kim. "I've got news about your custody case. Brenna's lawyer wants to negotiate." What changed? Apparently, Troy's having some business difficulties. Something about banking relationships and regulatory scrutiny. Funny how these things happen. Cole allowed himself a small smile. What's their offer? Joint custody, alternating weeks. They're also willing to discuss mediation instead of a trial. Counteroffer: full custody to me, supervised visitation for her. Take it or leave it. Cole, that's non-negotiable. She abandoned the children, used them as weapons, and tried to steal my life. The only reason I'm offering supervised visitation is because they're her children too. But they're coming home to me. And if she refuses? Cole thought about the operational plans spread across his motel room wall, about the team of veterans ready to destroy Troy's empire brick by brick. Then we proceed to Phase 2. The war was just beginning, and Cole Mitchell had no intention of losing. Chapter 6. The Squeeze begins. Troy Daniels' world began unraveling on a Tuesday morning when his assistant informed him that 3 major clients had canceled their contracts overnight. By noon, Pinnacle Bank had frozen his credit lines pending a routine audit. By evening, his lawyer was fielding calls from federal investigators interested in his business practices. Cole watched it all unfold from his command center, orchestrating the chaos with military precision. Chen's computer infiltration had yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Emails discussing vulnerable targets, financial documents showing shell company connections, and recorded phone calls where Troy explicitly outlined his predatory strategies. Bank records show he's leveraged beyond belief. Chin reported during their evening briefing. One major deal falls through, and his whole empire collapses like a house of cards. Williams nodded toward the surveillance photos spread across the table. He's starting to panic. Reeves caught him at 3 different bars yesterday, drinking heavily, making phone calls to people who aren't answering. What about Brenna? Luis asked. Cole pulled up the latest surveillance footage. She's scared. Troy told her his business difficulties were temporary, but she's not stupid. She's starting to realize she picked the losing side. As if summoned by their conversation, Cole's phone rang. Brenna's number. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Her voice was strained, exhausted. In person. About what? You know what? Troy's. His business is having problems. People are asking questions. I think maybe we should reconsider our arrangement. Cole let the silence stretch, letting her desperation grow. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? The children. They miss you. Maybe it would be better if they came home while we figure things out. And Troy. A longer pause. That's complicated. Uncomplicated. I can't just walk away from him, Cole. It's not that simple. Cole's voice dropped to Arctic levels. You walked away from me easily enough. While I was serving our country, you made your choice. Now you want to renegotiate because your new boyfriend's empire is crumbling. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You're a parasite, Brenna. You attach yourself to whoever can provide the most comfort, and when that runs out, you move on. The only difference is that this time, there are consequences. He hung up and turned his team. She's breaking. Troy's probably promising her that his problems are temporary, but she's smart enough to see the writing on the wall. So what's our next move? Cortez asked. Cole studied the operational timeline on the wall. We accelerate the pressure. It's time Troy learned what happens when you attack a soldier's family. The next morning, Troy arrived at his office to find a crowd of protesters outside his building. Military spouses and veterans, organized by Jennifer Santos, carried signs reading, "Stop preying on military families," and "Troy Daniels, home thief." Local news crews were already on scene, interviewing the protesters about predatory lending practices. Troy tried to enter through the back entrance, but found his way blocked by Derek Williams and 2 other veterans. They weren't threatening. They didn't need to be. The message was clear. We know who you are, and we're watching. Inside his office, Troy discovered that his computer systems had been compromised by a security breach. His IT department was frantically trying to restore functionality, unaware that Chun was monitoring their every move from a van outside. At 1,400 hours, Troy received a call from his largest investor, Meridian Capital Group. We need to discuss your portfolio. The voice was crisp, professional, concerned. Some irregularities have come to our attention. Troy's hands began to shake. Meridian controlled 60% of his project financing. Without their backing, he was finished. What kind of irregularities? The kind that require immediate clarification. We'll need to see all your books, all your client records, and detailed explanations for several questionable transactions. Our auditors will be there tomorrow morning. The line went dead. Troy stared at his phone, feeling his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He'd built his empire on the assumption that his victims would suffer in silence, that military families were too proud or too busy to fight back. He'd never considered that someone might organize them into a weapon. His secretary's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Daniels? There's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's from the IRS." Troy's blood pressure spiked. The IRS agent was polite, professional, and carrying a briefcase full of questions about Troy's tax filings over the past 3 years, particularly his deductions for business expenses that seemed unusually high for a real estate developer. "We've received some information suggesting possible irregularities," the agent explained. "Nothing formal yet, just some questions that need clarification." By the end of the day, Troy was drinking bourbon straight from the bottle, staring at financial documents that no longer made sense. His phone had stopped ringing, not because the pressure had eased, but because no one wanted to return his calls. At 2,100 hours, He received a text from an unknown number. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Things will get worse. Much worse. A concerned veteran. Troy tried calling Brenna, desperate for some kind of support, but she didn't answer. He tried calling his lawyer, his accountant, his business partners. Voicemail, every time. He was alone, and he was starting to understand that this wasn't random bad luck. This was a coordinated attack. Meanwhile, Cole sat in his motel room, monitoring reports from his team. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Troy's business relationships were dissolving. His financial backing was evaporating, and his confidence was shattered. But the real test was yet to come. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Brenna. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk to you about the children." He typed back, "Parking lot of Emma's school. 1,500 hours. Come alone." The next phase of the operation was about to begin, and Cole Mitchell was ready to reclaim what had been stolen from him. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. The parking lot of Pinehurst Elementary was nearly empty at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. Cole arrived early, positioning himself where he could see all approaches. Military habits died hard, and he wasn't taking chances with Brenna's desperation. She arrived 5 minutes late, driving a car he didn't recognize, probably borrowed from her sister. The BMW was gone, which told him everything he needed to know about Troy's current financial situation. Brenna looked haggard, her usual polished appearance replaced by the frayed edges of someone whose world was collapsing. She slid into the passenger seat of his truck without invitation, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and poorly concealed desperation. "You look tired," Cole observed. "Don't." Her voice was sharp, defensive. "Don't pretend you care about how I look." "You're right. I don't. Where are my children?" Brenna stared out the windshield at the empty playground where their children had once played. "They're safe. They're with my sister." That wasn't the question. "Still in Wilmington." "But Cole, we need to discuss." "Bring them home. Today." "It's not that simple anymore." Brenna turned to face him, and he could see the fear in her eyes. "Troy's having problems. Serious problems. People are asking questions about his business, and some of those questions involve me." Cole kept his expression neutral. "What kind of questions?" "Financial irregularities. The house sale, the mortgage transfers, even the deposits he made into my account. Everything's being investigated. My lawyer says I could be considered an accomplice if they find criminal activity." "And have they found criminal activity?" Brenna's silence was answer enough. Cole studied her profile, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly. "You're scared." "Of course I'm scared. The FBI showed up at Rachel's house yesterday, asking about my relationship with Troy, about financial documents, about whether I knew his business practices were illegal." "Did you?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Brenna's expression shifted through several emotions: guilt, defiance, resignation. "I suspected," she admitted finally. "Some of the things he said about other military wives, the way he talked about opportunities when husbands were deployed. I knew he was aggressive, but I didn't think—" "You didn't think you'd get caught." "I didn't think it was illegal." The words came out in a rush, a confession that had been building for days. He said everything he did was legal, just good business. He said military wives were easy targets because they were lonely and scared and didn't understand finance. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. He called military wives easy targets? Not like that. Not exactly. But he said soldiers were too focused on their careers to pay attention to financial details, and their wives were usually desperate enough to make poor decisions. He said it was like finding money just lying on the ground. "And you thought that was acceptable?" Brenna's composure finally cracked. "I thought he loved me. I thought we were building a life together, and yes, maybe some of his business practices were aggressive, but I wasn't making the decisions. I was just trying to survive." "Survive what? Our marriage? Our family? The terrible burden of being a military wife." "You were never here." The words exploded out of her, raw and desperate. 3 deployments in 6 years, Cole. 3 times I had to raise our children alone, handle everything alone, while you were off playing soldier on the other side of the world. I was serving our country. I was providing for our family. You were abandoning us." Brenna was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Every time you left, I died a little more. Every night alone, every school play you missed, every birthday party where other kids asked where Daddy was, I was drowning, and you didn't even notice. Cole absorbed this, his tactical mind noting the way she shifted blame, made herself the victim of circumstances she'd chosen. So you decided to replace me. I decided to save myself. And yes, maybe I made poor choices, but I was desperate and lonely, and he was there, and he made me feel wanted. By helping him steal from other military families. I never stole anything. You provided him with insider information about military wives. You attended support groups and spouse events, identifying vulnerable targets. You were his recruiting arm. Brenna's face went white. How do you? No. Because I'm a soldier, Brenna. Intelligence gathering is what I do. I know about the Santos family, the Williams family, the Chun family. I know about the support group meetings you attended with Troy, the financial advice you gave to desperate wives, the referrals you made to his shell companies. I was trying to help them. You were feeding them to a predator. And when their husbands came home to find their lives destroyed, you felt what? Proud? Accomplished. Brenna doubled over as if she'd been punched, sobs shaking her entire body. I didn't know it would hurt people. I thought it was just business. Cole watched her break down with clinical detachment. This was what 8 years of marriage had reduced to. A woman who betrayed not just him, but his entire community, sitting in his truck crying about the consequences of her choices. Where are my children? He asked again. I can't just hand them over. The FBI is watching everything I do. If I suddenly change custody arrangements, they'll think I'm trying to hide assets. Then we have a problem. Cole, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work together. Troy's finished. His business is collapsing. His investors are fleeing. Even his lawyers are abandoning him. I'll leave him. I'll cooperate with whatever investigation you started, but please don't destroy me completely. Cole started the truck engine. Get out. What? This conversation is over. You had your chance to do the right thing, and you chose Troy Daniels over your own children. Now you want me to protect you from the consequences. I'm their mother. You are my wife. That didn't stop you. Brenna opened the truck door, but didn't get out. If you take the children, I'll fight you. I'll drag this through court for years. Cole's smile was arctic. With what money? Your boyfriend's empire is ashes. Your father's businesses are about to face regulatory scrutiny. Your sister's house is mortgaged through one of Troy's shell companies. How long before that gets called in? The color drained from Brenna's face. You wouldn't. I'm a soldier, Brenna. When someone declares war on my family, I don't just fight back. I destroy them completely. You wanted to play with predators? Welcome to the real jungle. She stumbled out of the truck, staring at him through the window with something approaching terror. Cole put the vehicle in drive and pulled away, leaving her standing alone in the empty parking lot. His phone rang before he'd gone 2 blocks. Luis, we've got a problem. Troy just showed up at your house with 2 men. Armed men. Cole's blood turned to ice. Brenna said the children are in Wilmington. Then what's he doing at your place? Cole accelerated toward home, his mind racing through possibilities. Troy was desperate, cornered, and running out of options. Desperate men did desperate things. ETA 7 minutes. Call the others. If Troy wants to escalate this, we'll accommodate him. The war was about to enter its final phase, and Cole Mitchell was ready to finish what Troy Daniels had started. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Cole approached his house with tactical precision, parking 2 blocks away and advancing on foot through his neighbor's backyard. The presence of armed men changed everything. This was no longer about business rivalry or custody disputes. This was about survival. Troy's BMW sat in the driveway next to a black SUV with tinted windows. Through his bedroom window, Cole could see shapes moving inside his house. His training kicked in automatically. Assess threats, identify escape routes, neutralize hostile forces. His phone buzzed with a text from Luis, in position. Chin his eyes on the back. Williams covering the side street. Give us the word. Cole crept closer, using the fence line for concealment. Through the kitchen window, he could see Troy pacing frantically while 2 men in suits searched through his belongings. They weren't law enforcement. Their movements were too aggressive, too invasive. These were private security, the kind hired to intimidate rather than arrest. Another text, this time from Chen, recognized one of the guys. Marco Vega, enforcer from Meridian Capital. The others probably similar. Cole's jaw tightened. Meridian Capital, Troy's primary investor, the company that had frozen his accounts. This wasn't about custody or personal revenge anymore. Troy owed serious money to serious people, and he was desperate enough to involve Cole's family in his mess. Cole's phone rang. Troy's number. "I know you're out there." Troy's voice was shaking, barely controlled. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that you've destroyed my life over a woman who never loved you." Cole moved closer to the house, noting the angles and positions of the men inside. "Brenna made her choice. You both did. You don't understand. Meridian Capital wants their money back. $30 million that I don't have because your little war destroyed my business. They think I'm hiding assets, and they want to discuss my family connections. Your family connections are none of my concern, aren't they?" Troy's voice carried a desperate edge. "See, I've been telling them about my relationship with a certain military wife, about joint accounts and shared assets, about property transfers that might be reversed if the right pressure is applied." Cole felt ice form in his veins. "If you're threatening my children..." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining reality. These men want to recover their investment, and they're very creative about finding hidden assets. Military benefits, combat pay, death benefits, all potentially recoverable if they can prove fraud or conspiracy." Cole could see Troy through the window now, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly to the men who were dismantling his living room. The men who were searching for evidence that could tie Cole to Troy's fraudulent schemes. "Here's what's going to happen," Troy continued. "You're going to call off your dogs. You're going to fix what you broke. And you're going to help me explain to these gentlemen that your family has nothing to do with my business difficulties. And if I refuse, then Meridian Capital discovers that a decorated military officer has been conducting vigilante operations against legitimate businessmen. They discover that your wife was involved in property transfers that saved their marriage assets from creditors. They discover that your children are living with money that rightfully belongs to their investors." Cole closed his eyes, calculating options. Troy was desperate enough to drag innocent people into his mess, but he was also making a critical error. He thought Cole would choose his family's safety over justice. He'd forgotten that Cole was a soldier. "I'll be right in," Cole said and hung up. He immediately texted his team, "Execute Omega Protocol. Full authorization." Omega Protocol was their nuclear option. Total destruction of Troy's remaining assets, complete exposure of his criminal activities, and systematic elimination of his ability to threaten anyone ever again. It was also irreversible. Cole waited exactly 3 minutes, then walked through his front door. The two enforcers immediately focused on him, hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons. These were professionals, but they were also civilians who'd never faced someone with Cole's training. "Gentlemen," Cole said calmly, "I believe you're looking for me." Troy stepped forward, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. "Cole, meet Marco Vega and Thomas Klein. They represent some business associates of mine who are concerned about recent financial irregularities." Vega spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent. "Sergeant Mitchell, we understand you've been conducting some kind of investigation into Mr. Daniels' business practices." "That's correct. We'd like you to discontinue that investigation." Cole studied both men, noting their positioning, their confidence levels, their probable weapon placement. "And if I refuse?" Klein stepped forward. "Then we discuss alternative approaches to asset recovery. Military families have unique vulnerabilities, deployment schedules, financial pressures, children in public schools." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Cole felt the familiar calm that came before combat, the crystalline clarity that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan. "I see. And what exactly do you think I can do for you?" Troy's relief was visible. "Call off your investigation. Fix the damage to my business relationships. Help me explain that my personal problems don't affect my financial obligations." Interesting proposal. Cole moved deeper into the room, ostensibly relaxing, but actually positioning himself for optimal engagement angles. There's just one problem. What's that? Vega asked. You're in my house, threatening my family, because you believed a liar and a thief. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Vega and Klein tensed, recognizing the change in Cole's demeanor. Troy stepped backward, suddenly aware that his negotiating position wasn't as strong as he believed. Troy didn't tell you everything. Cole continued conversationally. He didn't mention that his business was built on defrauding military families. He didn't mention that every asset you're trying to protect was stolen from soldiers and their wives. And he certainly didn't mention that the FBI has been building a case against him for 3 months. Troy's face went pale. That's not true. Cole smiled coldly. Chun, are you recording this? A voice came from Cole's phone, which he'd left connected to a conference call. Every word. The FBI field office has been very interested in today's activities. Vega and Klein exchanged glances, professional criminals recognizing a setup when they saw one. Mr. Vega, Cole said, still conversational, I assume you're aware that threatening military personnel is a federal crime? And Mr. Klein, how do you feel about conspiracy charges? Both men were reaching for their weapons when the front door burst open. Luis, Williams, and 2 other veterans entered with overwhelming force, armed and moving with military precision. Chen came through the back door, simultaneously cutting off retreat. The enforcers found themselves surrounded by men who'd survived actual combat, men who didn't intimidate easily and didn't negotiate with terrorists. Drop your weapons, Luis commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. The standoff lasted exactly 5 seconds before Vega and Klein recognized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. They placed their weapons on the floor and stepped back with their hands visible. Troy looked around the room with growing horror, finally understanding that he'd walked into a trap. Mr. Daniels, Cole said, his voice still calm, you made a critical error. You thought I was fighting for money or pride or revenge. You thought you could threaten my family and I'd back down like a civilian. Cole, please. But I'm not a civilian. I'm a soldier. And when someone threatens my family, I don't negotiate. I eliminate the threat. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Chun, FBI en route. 3 minutes. Gentlemen, Cole announced, this conversation is over. Mr. Vega and Mr. Klein, you're about to have a discussion with federal agents about your intimidation tactics. Mr. Daniels, you're about to discover what happens when you bring criminals into a soldier's war. Troy collapsed into Cole's recliner, the same chair where he'd posed in the video that started everything. You've destroyed me. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone. No, Cole corrected. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided to prey on military families. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Sirens were approaching in the distance. Cole looked around his living room, his space that had been violated, his sanctuary that had been turned into a battlefield, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. The war was almost over. There was just one last enemy to defeat. Chapter 9. Absolute Victory. 6 months later, Cole stood in the same courthouse where his divorce had been finalized, but this time he wasn't alone. Emma and Luke flanked him on either side, holding his hands as they waited for the final custody hearing. The children had been home for 4 months now, and the change in them was remarkable. They were laughing again, sleeping through the night, calling him Daddy instead of by his first name. Brenna sat across the courtroom with her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender who'd drawn the short straw. She looked smaller than Cole remembered, diminished by months of legal battles and financial ruin. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by department store business attire. The confidence that had once defined her had been stripped away layer by layer. Troy Daniels wasn't in the courtroom. He was in federal prison, serving a 10-year sentence for wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The FBI investigation that Chun had referenced during their confrontation had been very real. Cole's team had simply accelerated the timeline and provided additional evidence. Meridian Capital had cut all ties with Troy the moment federal charges were filed, leaving him completely alone to face the consequences of his actions. The enforcers, Vega and Klein, had received 5-year sentences for intimidation and conspiracy. Their cooperation with federal investigators had reduced their sentences, but it had also provided prosecutors with detailed information about Troy's entire criminal network. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hawkins presiding. Judge Hawkins was a veteran herself, former Navy JAG, and she made it clear during preliminary hearings that she had little patience for parents who used children as weapons in their personal wars. "Be seated," she said, reviewing the file before her. "We're here today for a final custody determination in the matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell. I've reviewed all the evidence, testimony, and recommendations. Before I make my ruling, I want to address something directly." She looked first at Cole, then at Brenna. "This case has involved some of the most disturbing behavior I've seen in 20 years on the bench. We have documented evidence of child abandonment, emotional manipulation, financial fraud, and conspiracy with criminal elements. We also have evidence of a military father who served his country honorably while his family was systematically destroyed by predators." Brenna's attorney started to speak, but Judge Hawkins held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Mrs. Mitchell, your actions over the past year represent a comprehensive betrayal of your family, your community, and your responsibilities as a mother. You abandoned your children to pursue a relationship with a criminal. You used your knowledge of military families to help that criminal identify and exploit vulnerable targets. When confronted with the consequences of your actions, you attempted to use your children as bargaining chips." Brenna was crying silently, her head bowed. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge continued, "your response to your family's betrayal was methodical, thorough, and completely within your legal rights. You documented evidence, you worked within the system, and when criminals threatened your children, you protected them using appropriate force and legal channels." Judge Hawkins referred to her notes. "The custody recommendation is straightforward. Full physical and legal custody is awarded to Sergeant Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell is granted supervised visitation rights, 1 afternoon per month, pending successful completion of court-mandated counseling and community service." "Your Honor," Brenna's attorney protested, "my client has been cooperating with authorities, and she's attempted to rebuild her relationship with her children." "Your client," Judge Hawkins interrupted, "participated in crimes that destroyed multiple military families. She abandoned her children and attempted to manipulate them against their father. The supervised visitation is generous under the circumstances." Cole squeezed his children's hands. Emma looked up at him with those green eyes that mirrored his own and whispered, "Does this mean we get to stay with you forever?" "Forever," Cole confirmed. As they left the courthouse, Luis was waiting by Cole's truck with a satisfied grin. "How does it feel to win completely?" Cole considered the question while helping the twins into their car seats. Troy was in prison, his criminal network dismantled. Brenna was facing years of legal and financial consequences. The military families who'd been victimized had received restitution from seized assets. His children were home and healing. "It feels like justice," he said finally. "What about Brenna? You think she'll try to fight the custody decision?" Cole glanced back at the courthouse, where Brenna was standing alone on the steps, her attorney already walking away. She looked lost, abandoned by everyone who'd once supported her criminal activities. With what money? Her father's businesses are under federal investigation for money laundering. Her sister lost her house when a mortgage was called in. Troy's assets were seized to pay restitution. She's working as a waitress in Wilmington, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda. That's Cole, brother. That's consequences. Cole started the truck and checked his mirrors as they pulled into traffic. She made her choices. She betrayed her family, her community, and her values for money and excitement. Everything that happened afterward was the natural result of those choices. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the children chattering in the back seat about their plans for the weekend. Cole was taking them camping, real camping, with tents and campfires and stories under the stars, not the artificial adventures Brenna had preferred. "You know what the best part is?" Cole said eventually. "What's that?" "Emma asked me yesterday if Troy was her real daddy. When I explained that I was her only father, that Troy was just someone who'd confused her for a while, she said she'd always known the difference. Kids are smart. smarter than their mother. Cole's voice carried no emotion, just cold fact. Luke asked me if Mommy was coming home. When I explained that she lived somewhere else now, but still loved him, he asked if she loved him when she made them call Troy Daddy. Luis winced. What did you tell him? The truth. That sometimes adults make terrible decisions that hurt the people they're supposed to protect. That loving someone means putting their needs before your own, and Mommy forgot how to do that for a while. Think she'll ever figure it out? Cole thought about Brenna's expression in the courtroom, the way she'd looked at the children like she was seeing them clearly for the first time in months. There might be hope for redemption, but that was her journey to make. Maybe, but it doesn't matter anymore. She had her chance to be part of our family, and she chose Troy Daniels instead. Now she gets to live with that choice. They pulled into the driveway of Cole's new house, a 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district, purchased with his combat pay and the proceeds from selling the old house. Emma and Luke ran inside, excited to show Luis the fort Cole had built them in the backyard. As Cole watched his children play, he reflected on the past year. He'd been betrayed by the woman he loved, attacked by criminals, and forced to fight for his children's future. But he'd also learned something important. When good people stand together against predators, when they refuse to be victims, when they fight back with intelligence and determination, they can win. Troy Daniels had built his empire on the assumption that military families would suffer in silence. Brenna had betrayed her family because she thought Cole would forgive anything for the sake of keeping them together. They'd both been wrong. Cole Mitchell was a soldier, and soldiers didn't surrender. They didn't forgive enemies who threatened their families. They fought until the threat was eliminated, and then they built something better from the ashes. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Santos. Troy's sentencing hearing is next week. All the families you helped want to buy you dinner. Cole smiled and typed back, rain check. I'm taking my kids camping. The war was over. The good guys had won. And Staff Sergeant Cole Mitchell had learned that the most important battles weren't fought on foreign soil. They were fought in courtrooms and living rooms and hearts for the right to protect the people who mattered most. He'd won that battle completely, and he'd never have to fight it again. The children ran up to him, grass stains on their clothes and joy in their eyes. Daddy, will you help us roast marshmallows tonight? Always, Cole said, gathering them into his arms. Daddy's always here when you need him. And this time, it was a promise he'd never have to break. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.